I guess I get the penultimate word in the wrap-up. This has been, there's been a tremendous amount of information that we've gone through in the last few hours, and so in some ways it's difficult to sum it all up. But Sharon instructed me to come up with things that are potentially ways forward, things that we could agree on, areas of consensus, and then flag other areas that perhaps need a different type of venue. And so I have three things that I took away that raised to the level based on a simple metric of how many times did it get a mention, either from panelists or from people asking questions. The first is I've lumped policy and reimbursement together, and I would just add the editorial comment that the question I raised about value, which is actually incorporation of outcomes, needs to be considered in that as well. Clearly that is a contentious issue. Sheila, I think, is perhaps had a very different perspective on it than I did, in the sense that having sat on the SACGHS for 6 years and now listening to this again, I'm saying, have we made no progress whatsoever? Because that sort of was my takeaway. I know we need optimism, but I'm reminded of the movie Jerry Maguire, where they say, if you say it's not about the money, it's about the money. Clearly this is an area where there's a lot of difference of opinion, and in some ways, what would be the takeaway that we could have from that? Are different venues needed to work out these issues? Is this something where this group could add to that discussion? I frankly don't know the answer to that question, but I'm sure it's something that we'll be thinking about as we go forward. On the positive note, there were two things that I heard today that were mentioned by a number of different individuals that I think we do have, in fact, a consensus around. One is a clear need for standards of care and guidelines that are well-defined, that are consistent, that are structured, that are adequately explicit, and that can be consumed by electronic health records and clinical decision support systems. That got a lot of different mentions, and I think that this is something that could be a very a positive thing if we could broker all of the different siloed processes into something where we could come out with a more definitive statement based on our best level of knowledge. So I would like to see that as something that we would take on as a project moving forward. The second issue that I think there was clearly consensus on relates to the issues of building the knowledge base, which encompassed actually quite a number of different areas. Sharing of information. I love the analogy of Dan and Len, not an analogy, the statement, every patient should be a clinical trial. I mean, I think that's a really, that's a great goal to kind of shoot for, because that's where we would really have the opportunity to potentially learn very quickly. It clearly needs better clinical data acquisition. We need to repurpose our electronic health records to move away from doing billing well, but nothing else very well, to actually making them efficient collectors of data. And I think that's really important for two reasons, because there were two big issues that were raised that I think we might have an opportunity to move the needle on. One of them was in the context of gathering the data. So the question I would raise is, can we lower the cost of gathering outcomes data if we can repurpose data that's collected in clinical care transactions? Would that be able to solve some of the problems of the testing companies that need data to be able to show clinical utility, but can't invest, you know, $20 or $30 million to run a traditional clinical trial? I think that's an interesting question. The other question that Alberto raised is, could this type of data help us in the post-market surveillance area? So that if we have good post-market surveillance, could we perhaps lower the bar on introduction of things into clinical practice under certain parameters to really test them in the environment to say, are they really doing what they say they're doing? Now, we're going to have different standards. If it's something where there could be a potentially very a dramatic change in therapy or an invasive intervention, then maybe that's not the route. But for other things, like, say, pharmacogenomic testing for a drug where it appears that there's reasonable evidence that would improve the dosing and it doesn't look like it would be associated with a horrific adverse outcome, then collection of data, and as this is introduced into clinical care, might be quite efficient if we can actually define our outcomes properly and have systems that would be able to collect data around those outcomes. Now, having said that, I think that I will make one final reflection about a number of people that commented that, they represented a group that was underrepresented at the meeting. That's an interesting thing, given that you're all self-assembled. We didn't put out invitations to this group, that group, or the other group. So if, in fact, your group was underrepresented, it raises the question in my mind, why are you underrepresented? Why is this question not as important to you as it is to some others? And I don't know the answer to that, but it is just an interesting reflection on what underrepresentation really means. Now, having said that, there is a group that wasn't recommended, or that wasn't represented at all, other than some dabblers, of which I would include myself, and that is informaticists. And if, in fact, we really want to take electronic health records to the next level and use them to get this type of information and develop ways to share the information in ways that are not going to put people at risk in terms of information going where it should not go, I think we clearly need to engage with informaticists that are dealing with this problem in a very proactive way. And since we did talk a fair amount about clinical decision support, one of the groups that I would suggest that we reach out to, is the Clinical Decision Support Consortium, which is headed by Blackford Middleton and has been funded through HRQ for the last 6 years, that is really looking at an open clinical decision support model whereby clinical decision support rules that are developed by organizations could be put out and could then be consumed by electronic health records without every system having to build their own. I think it's a really interesting concept. I think it's something that would work very well for this particular arena, but we need to have those people engaged with us, because I can tell you from my conversations with Blackford that genetics and genomics really isn't on their radar screen. But if there's one place that's really where the electronic handling of information is going to be needed, it's clearly going to be when whole genome sequence hits. So those are my takeaways. I'm glad that I had two that I think we have consensus on, and only one that looks to be a relative snake pit. So hopefully we'll be able to do something positive with that. With that, I'll turn it over to the organizer, Sharon.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks to everybody today. This has been a long and really packed day. We wanted to try to do this in one day, and I think that we succeeded with a great deal. I thought about, maybe it was 5 years ago, Genetic Alliance did Eyes on the Prize, Truth-Telling About Genetic Testing, which is the monograph that at least was outside when we started today. And when we did that, there were groups that said, what do you mean truth-telling? Who's lying? Who are you trying to throw rocks at? And there was a lot of consternation the whole day. It is very different now, and I think Sheila was right that it's both the same and it's different as well. The conversation has moved. There's a lot more that's available to us as patients and as providers. There's a lot more moving in the informatics and technology side. There's a lot more questions in the reimbursement and regulatory side that I think have more data, and we saw that today, and I thank all the panelists for bringing a real richness to it. I too noted the underrepresented, rare, unique theme, and I thought that was a fine one, because we're all N of ones. Whoever said that ultimately personalized medicine is an N of one. Every one of us believes that we're different than another, and that we're here with a different hat or a different perspective, and I think that's true. And so the idea then is for us to figure out how, with all this difference, we can come together. We asked for us to look at elephants in the room, and I think we named a bunch of those today. We talked about weasel words in some documents and guidances. We talked about money, and I think sometimes we keep money off the table. We talked about abortion. We talked about reproductive rights. We talked about the interface between law, medicine, money, and human need, which is a tough place for us to have conversations. There was some us against them here. I'm going to welcome us to continue to look into the places where we believe we have to represent one group of people against another group, and suggest that, in fact, we're seeing merging. We're seeing merging in the clinical to research continuum and vice versa. We're seeing merging in the manufacturers to laboratory, laboratorians, laboratory-developed tests, in for-profits and not-for-profits, lots of hybrids, lots of hybrid value chains. So I think we should be looking there as well. I think that for us, of course, Genetic Alliance comes to this with a patient perspective first, but with a great deal of respect for all the other pieces. We're not Pollyanna-ish. We don't think that good tests will fall out of the sky and that we'll all get the right health care managed by the right clinicians. So we see this needs to be a really big engagement by all of us working together to become a team of teams to work with one another. And to that end, one of the goals, Reed was very right on in the beginning when he said this is just the beginning, that United Health Group and some others are interested in supporting a coalition of individuals who will work together with the different perspectives, with the different stakeholders, different sectors, to bring together a series of recommendations, both long and short-term recommendations. So my invitation is, and we'll send this out electronically too because some people had to leave, that any of you who are interested in doing that with us on whatever level, whether it's a final review level, whether it's a real engagement around what each of the panels had to say, we're very happy to do that. And then I suspect we're going to spin off into other groups that interface with already existing entities. Whoever said or also earlier today, let's not start another coalition, let's not start another activity. Let's find the ones that are already happening and work with those as well. My final comment would be to thank the team, Genetic Alliance team, who put this on today. There was a great deal of work by a number of people in the room. Tanya was on all day wherever she is. Marc, Natasha, Liz, and I'm sure I'm going to forget somebody, our photographer, Elizabeth, and to thank all of you for your really honest engagement, and I look forward to working with you in the future. So please email us and we'll get engaged. Thank you.